Once, in a village at the foot of a mountain, there lived two brothers. The elder was called Nolbu, the younger, Heungbu. They had come from the same womb, yet they could not have been more different. Not as different as heaven and earth, but as different as the living and the dead. Nolbu's fields stretched from the village gate to the tree line. His storehouses were packed floor to ceiling with rice, and even in winter, smoke rose thick and constant from his chimney. Heungbu lived on the other end of the village in a mud-walled thatch house that let the wind through from every direction, crowded with a wife and more children than he could easily feed. Nolbu was not merely stingy. He was a man who took pleasure in the misery of others. When tenant farmers knelt before him in lean years, hats pressed to the dirt, begging for a little more time, Nolbu would rest his feet on the table and study the ceiling with a faint smile. Then he would turn his head slowly and say, "So?" He lent money at ruinous interest until he owned the land outright. When a family could not repay him, he took their daughters as collateral. The village feared him. Fear and hatred can look almost identical, and in Nolbu's presence, they were exactly the same thing. Heungbu was different. He had nothing, but his heart was wide. He split what little food he had with hungry neighbors and could not walk past an injured animal on the road. It was a good heart. It did not, however, put food in the pot. His children were many, far too many, and every morning they trailed behind their parents like chicks behind a hen, tugging at sleeves, saying, "Father, I'm hungry." "Wait a little longer," Heungbu would say, smiling. "The rice is almost ready." The pot held nothing but water. By the time autumn came and the harvest was done, Heungbu had made up his mind. "I'll go ask my brother for a bag of rice," he said. "Just one. I'll pay him back in spring." His wife shook her head. "He won't give you anything. You'll come back worse off than you left. He's still my brother. Surely he won't let his own family starve." Heungbu straightened his worn coat and walked to Nolbu's house. The gate was tall, the roof tiles layered thick, and from somewhere inside came the smell of food and the busy sounds of servants. Heungbu stood at the entrance and called out carefully. After a long wait, Nolbu appeared. His face was oiled and full, his belly round. The moment he saw Heungbu, something moved in his eyes. Not annoyance. Something closer to amusement. "What do you want?" "Brother, my children haven't eaten in days. If you could spare just one bag of rice, I'll repay you in the spring, I promise." Nolbu looked him up and down and let out a slow, contemptuous laugh. "My rice? Why would you eat my rice? You can't even feed your own family. How many of them are there now? Breeding like a dog in an alley, and then showing up at my gate with your hand out. Brother, please, get out. Don't let me see your face here again." Then Nolbu's wife came running from the kitchen. Without a word, she swung the wooden rice paddle she was carrying and struck Heungbu across the face with all her strength. The blow burned. Tears rose in his eyes, but he held them. Nolbu laughed out loud. Heungbu pressed his hand to his cheek and turned away. He thought, walking home, "At least the cheek is warm. Almost feels like I've eaten something." He did not cry. He could not cry in front of the children who were waiting for him. The following spring, Heungbu was sweeping his yard when something fell from the sky and hit the ground with a soft thud. It was a baby swallow. One leg was bent at a wrong angle. Its wings beat helplessly against the dirt. Heungbu crouched down and lifted it carefully onto his palm. He could feel the tiny heart pounding. He tore a strip of cloth and bound the leg as gently as he could. His wife knelt beside him and helped. "Do you think it will live?" she asked. "It has to. Something this small, still fighting this hard." The whole family nursed the bird through the summer. The children took turns holding it. On days when there was almost nothing to eat, they made sure the swallow had food first. By the end of summer, it had healed. When autumn came, the swallow spread its wings and lifted into the sky, turning south. Heungbu stood in the yard and waved until it disappeared. "Fly safe," he said. "Come back next year." Spring returned. One morning, Heungbu stepped outside to find a swallow circling under his eaves. The same bird, he was certain. The faint white mark from the cloth bandage was still visible on its leg. It descended slowly and dropped something small from its beak onto the ground, then rose again and was gone. Heungbu picked it up. A seed, small and black. "Looks like a gourd seed," his wife said, leaning over to look. "Then let's plant it." He put it in the earth in a corner of the yard. He watered it. He pulled the weeds away from it. His children crouched around it every morning to see if anything had changed. In a few days, a pale green shoot pushed through the soil. By midsummer, the vine had climbed over the roof, and 3 enormous gourds hung from it, swelling until they were bigger than full moons. When autumn came and the gourds were ripe, Heungbu and his wife lifted them down and brought out a saw. Heave, heave. The children stood in a circle around them, breathless, not making a sound. The lid of the first gourd cracked open and rice poured out. White, gleaming rice that spilled across the entire yard. The children screamed with joy. The second gourd opened and bolts of silk tumbled out, red and blue, pooling on the ground like water. The third gourd split and carpenters stepped out one by one, saying nothing, going straight to work. And before the sun set, the sagging thatch house had been replaced by a tiled roof home with proper walls and solid floors. That night, for the first time, the family ate until they were full and slept without shivering. Word spread quickly, as it does. Nolbu heard the story and felt something twist inside him. He went to see for himself, and it was true. A real house. Full storehouses, rice he could smell from the gate. He walked home with his fists clenching and unclenching the whole way. His lips moved without making sound. That useless wretch, that nobody, richer than me now. When Heungbu told him about the swallow, Nolbu nodded and smiled and said very little. But inside, the calculation was already done. Before dawn the next morning, he went out alone and searched under the eaves until he found a nest. He reached in and pulled out a fledgling. It was barely able to open its eyes. It opened its beak and made small, weak sounds. Nolbu looked at it for a moment. Then he pinched the leg between 2 fingers and bent it. Crack! A small sound. The bird could not even cry out. The angle was wrong. But Nolbu frowned, adjusted, and wrapped a strip of cloth around it anyway, pressing the injured bird back into his palm. "That ought to do it," he said. He put the swallow in a box under the eaves and gave it food and water every day. Not out of care, out of calculation. When autumn came, the swallow lifted from the box with an uneven flight and disappeared south. Nolbu stood in the yard with his arms folded, watching. "See you in spring," he said. The swallow returned when the weather turned warm again, a seed in its beak. Nolbu snatched it the moment the bird descended. He turned it over in his palm. Small and black, just like the one Heungbu had described, but the skin of his palm felt cold where the seed rested, an odd cold for a spring morning. He noticed it and ignored it. He planted the seed, and it grew, faster than it should have, and larger, unnaturally large. His servants avoided the corner of the yard where the vine climbed the wall. The gourds that formed were a dull, clouded color, and at night, if the house was quiet, there was a low sound from the direction of the vine, a hum almost, a vibration without clear source. Nolbu told himself it was the wind. By fall, there were 3 gourds. He had his servants cut them down and lay them in the yard. Neighbors gathered to watch. They had heard about Heungbu's gourds, and they came expecting to see something remarkable. They were not wrong. Nolbu picked up the saw and set it against the first gourd with a grin. The moment the blade bit into the skin, a black and burning wind came tearing out of the crack, reeking of sulfur. Then the lid blew off entirely with a sound like a struck drum. Demons poured out, not 1 or 2. They kept coming, small and dark-skinned with burning eyes, each one carrying an iron-forged club. They hit the ground and came straight for Nolbu without pause. The first club landed across his back with a sound that echoed off the walls. He went down face first. When he tried to rise, another blow came. Ribs, shoulder, shin. The demons took turns. When one grew tired, another stepped in. Nolbu rolled in the dirt and begged, "Please, stop, please." The neighbors who had screamed at first stood back now with folded arms and watched. Nobody moved to help. The demons beat him until he could no longer lift his face from the mud. Then, one by one, they were sucked back into the gourd as though pulled from inside, and the lid sealed itself shut. The yard was quiet. Nolbu lay still for a long time. His lip was split. One eye was swelling shut. He could taste dirt. When a servant came to help him up, he waved the hand away and ground his teeth and stood on his own. "The second one," he said. The servants looked at each other. Nobody wanted to be the one to say no to that voice. They brought the second gourd forward. Nolbu took the saw himself. His hands were shaking, but he set the blade to the skin. The smell arrived before the lid opened. It was a smell with no simple name. Rot and something not yet rotted, layered together. The smell of something large, left too long in summer heat. Several onlookers pressed their hands over their mouths and stepped back. Then, black water burst from the seam. Not flowed. Burst as if under tremendous pressure, spraying in all directions, soaking the yard in an instant. The water was dark and viscous, and things floated in it. Feathers, fragments of bone, shapes that didn't resolve into anything recognizable. It rose to Nolbu's ankles, and where it touched his skin, it stung. Nolbu's wife screamed, lifted her skirts, and scrambled up onto the garden wall. The neighbors were shoved back by the wave, some falling. One person retched from the smell. One of the servants had gotten some of the water on his hand and was screaming, pulling the hand to his chest. A red mark had risen on the skin. The water drained slowly. It left black stains across the whole yard. The smell did not go with it. Nolbu stood in the ruin of his yard. He was soaked through, bruised everywhere, struggling to breathe. His wife was still on the wall, crying, telling him to stop. The servants had drifted to the far side of the gate. He fixed his eyes on the third gourd. One of these has to have something in it. The others were wrong, but this one might be different. You don't quit at the last one. Greed is stronger than fear. More precisely, greed eats fear until nothing is left. "Open it," he said. No one moved. He picked up the saw himself. The moment the blade touched the gourd shook. Not violently. A fine internal trembling, as though something breathing inside had noticed him. Then the lid split open by itself, without the saw. Sound came first, a slow, low funeral chant. Eoheo, eoheo, eoheo. One beat at a time, landing in the yard like stones dropped in still water. Then the pallbearers appeared, figures wrapped head to foot in white mourning cloth, stepping out in a long procession, shouldering a funeral bier between them. They moved through the yard in a slow, measured circle. Nolbu did not move. The pallbearers did not look at him. They chanted and circled. The bier they carried was empty. Not yet. Then one of them stopped. It turned to face Nolbu. There were no eyes. Where eyes should have been, there was only smooth, unbroken skin, quiet and complete, as though eyes had never been part of the design. Nolbu felt the strength go out of his body all at once. His knees hit the ground and he did not feel it. His mouth opened and no sound came. He was looking at something that knew him, that had always known him, that had simply been waiting for the right time to look back. The pallbearers finished their circuit and filed back into the gourd, one by one. The least one in, the lid closed. The chant faded into the walls. The yard was silent. Nolbu sat in the dirt, face gray, for a very long time. No one came near him. The ruin continued through the rest of that day. Whatever had come from the gourds moved through the house like water through cupped hands. The storehouses emptied. Roof tiles cracked and fell. The papers that documented his debts and land transactions were caught by a wind that came from nowhere and scattered across the yard before lifting into the sky. The neighbors clicked their tongues and went home. "Well," they said, "what did you expect?" None of them said they were sorry. It was midwinter when Nolbu appeared at Heungbu's gate. He was wearing a single thin layer of clothing, shaking with cold. His wife stood behind him, equally underdressed, equally diminished. The face that had once been the most well-fed face in the village was now gaunt and rough. The bruise above his eye had faded to yellow, but hadn't fully gone. "Heungbu," he said. His voice had lost everything that used to be in it. "Your brother was wrong." He couldn't raise his head. Heungbu looked at him for a long moment. Beside him, his wife spoke quietly. "Are you going to let him in?" Her eyes said what she didn't put into words. She hadn't forgotten the rice paddle. Heungbu opened the gate wide. "Come inside, brother. Food first." Nolbu could not look up. Heungbu took his hand. It was cold as iron, and led him in. The children came running out and crowded around their uncle without hesitation. That night, the whole family sat at the same table. The brothers faced each other over a bowl of rice. They sat for a long time without speaking. There was a great deal to say. That was enough for now. Nolbu lived with Heungbu after that. The cruelty was gone, not suppressed, but gone. The way a fire goes out when there's nothing left to burn. He became a quiet man, very quiet. He sat in the yard sometimes and looked up at the sky, and no one could tell what he was seeing there, whether he was remembering something or trying not to. Perhaps it was a smooth-skinned face with no eyes, looking back at him from inside whatever came next. In spring, he watched for the swallow's return. When it came, he didn't wave. He just watched from a distance. Heungbu never changed. He still laughed. He still shared what he had. He still could not walk past someone going hungry without doing something about it. The village people said of him, Heungbu didn't receive goodness as a reward. His goodness was the reward. Those are different things. Every spring, the swallow returned to the eaves of their house. When Heungbu's children waved it in with both arms, the bird flicked its wings once and slipped back into the nest, looking down at the world with two small black eyes, knowing everything it needed